In the Loita Hills of southwestern Kenya, there is a boy named Maasai. He is 6 years old. He woke up before sunrise this morning, walked out of his family's Enkiyama without being told, and spent 3 hours with a small herd of goats in open, semi-arid bush, alone, carrying a stick, making decisions about where to move the animals based on grass quality and weather. No adult within shouting distance, no phone, no safety net of any visible kind. He is not a special child. He is not exceptionally brave. He is not the son of a warrior who passed down unusual genes. He is 6 years old, and this is Tuesday. In the same week, somewhere in the United States or the United Kingdom, a statistically typical 9-year-old will experience clinical-level anxiety symptoms. Not occasional worry. Clinical-level symptoms. The American Psychological Association's 2023 survey of children aged 8 to 12 found that 1 in 3 reported feeling so worried on a regular basis that it interfered with daily functioning. The CDC's most recent data puts diagnosed anxiety disorders in American children at approximately 9.4%, a figure that has climbed every decade since systematic measurement began in the 1990s. 2 children, same species, same fundamental neurobiology. One is managing livestock alone in open savanna at age 6. The other cannot sit through a school lunch period without a regulated anxiety response. It is not the air. It is not the absence of screens, though that is part of it. It is not that Maasai children do not feel fear. They do, and their elders will tell you this directly. It is that fear, in the Maasai developmental environment, is encountered at a specific pace, witnessed by specific people, and responded to in a specific way. And those 3 things together produce a neurological outcome that almost no child in the Western world ever receives. Here is what that system looks like. And here is why removing any one piece of it produces a different result entirely. Before the practices make sense, one thing has to be said clearly. Fearlessness is not the absence of fear. Every developmental researcher who has studied the Maasai, and there are not many, which is itself a problem, agrees on this point. Fearlessness is a trained relationship with fear. It is the result of a nervous system that has encountered fear at the right dose, at the right age, and in the right social context, enough times that the encounter no longer produces a shutdown response. The clinical term is graduated exposure. The neuroscience behind it involves the prefrontal cortex, specifically its capacity to regulate the amygdala's threat response. When a child encounters a manageable threat repeatedly and survives it, not escapes it, survives it, the prefrontal cortex builds what researchers call inhibitory control over the amygdala. The child's brain physically changes. The architecture of their fear response becomes more regulated. This is not a metaphor. A 2019 study published in Developmental Cognitive Neuroscience measured prefrontal cortex development in children aged 5 to 9 across 3 population samples. Children with regular, unsupervised outdoor risk exposure showed measurably thicker prefrontal cortical development and faster threat response regulation times than children in structured, low-risk environments. The difference was not subtle. What the Maasai have done for generations, without knowing the term prefrontal cortex, without a single developmental psychology textbook, is build a child-rearing environment that systematically delivers the conditions for this neurological development. 3 conditions specifically. They operate together. The Maasai did not name them as a system, but they function as one. The Maasai do not protect children from risk. They sequence it. This is the distinction that matters, and it is the one that is almost universally misunderstood when Westerners first encounter Maasai childhood. The intuition is that Maasai children are simply exposed to danger without protection, that the environment is harsh and they adapt or they don't. That framing misses what is actually happening. A Maasai child's first solo responsibility with animals is not a full herd in open terrain. It is 2 or 3 goats in a bounded area, close enough to the Enkiyama that an adult can observe without being seen. The child believes they are alone. They are not yet entirely alone. The risk is real enough to feel genuine. The safety margin is real enough to prevent genuine harm. That distinction is the mechanism. By age 4, a Maasai child is reliably handling small animals. By age 5, the radius expands. By age 6, a child like Lemasoli is genuinely managing a small herd in open land. The stakes escalate with the demonstrated competence. The child is never dropped into a challenge they have not already partially experienced in a smaller form. Contrast this with the standard Western developmental trajectory. A child is protected from most meaningful physical risk until roughly age 8 or 9. Then they are placed in structured, organised sports, which are competitive, evaluated, and adult-managed, or in outdoor educational programs that are similarly scaffolded. The child has not built the neurological infrastructure for managed risk before they encounter its social and evaluative pressures. They arrive at the challenge without the foundation. Or, increasingly, they do not arrive at the challenge at all. The 2020 British Child Accident Prevention Trust analysis found that the average radius within which British children were allowed to roam unsupervised had shrunk by 90% since the 1970s. American data tells a nearly identical story. The practical translation is not complicated, but it requires resisting an instinct that feels like protection. A 3-year-old can carry breakable things and be responsible for what happens if they drop them. A 5-year-old can make a real mistake with a real consequence that the parent does not immediately repair. A 7-year-old can navigate a familiar neighbourhood alone. The risk must be real enough to matter. If the child knows the adult will intervene before anything actually happens, the neurological benefit does not occur. The brain only updates its threat model when the threat is genuine and the child manages it. This is the foundation, but it cannot work in isolation. Here is the element that almost every summary of Maasai childhood leaves out. A Maasai child does not experience risk privately. Their competence and their fear are witnessed, not by one parent, by a structure. The Maasai operate through age-grade social organisation, a system documented in detail by anthropologist Melissa Hine in fieldwork across 3 Maasai communities in Tanzania and Kenya between 2008 and 2014. In this system, children are grouped not by family, but by age cohort. They move through developmental stages together. When a child in the cohort masters a responsibility, manages the herd alone, runs a longer distance, handles a confrontation with an older animal, that accomplishment is seen by other children in the cohort, by older children who have already moved through that stage, and by community elders who mark the progression explicitly. This matters for a reason that is entirely neurological. The human threat response system is social. Fear does not process the same way in isolation as it does when witnessed. A child who is seen being brave, specifically seen by people whose recognition matters to them, receives a neurochemical response that reinforces the behaviour at a deeper level than private accomplishment does. The recognition activates the mesolimbic reward pathway. The brain tags the experience: fear encountered, survived, witnessed, recognised. Do this again. The modern equivalent, a parent saying, "Good job," in a private backyard, is not nothing, but it is not the same signal. The audience is one person whose approval the child already has. The developmental dose is lower. The practical translation is harder to implement than Tier 1 because it requires other children and other adults to be present. But it is not impossible. A neighbourhood where children play genuinely unsupervised, not in a parent-monitored playdate, but in a group that solves its own conflicts and sets its own terms, approximates the age-grade witness structure. Multi-generational settings where older children mentor younger ones, rather than adults managing the full hierarchy, are closer still. The key variable is not the presence of adults. It is the presence of peers and near peers who observe competence and name it. The moment a child knows that other children saw them succeed at something genuinely difficult, something changes in how they approach the next difficult thing. This is the part I have not mentioned yet, and it is the part that makes the first two tiers generate a result instead of just generating experiences. Maasai elders have a concept embedded in how they speak about child development that does not translate neatly into English. The closest rendering is something like, authority is given to the child in the exact measure that the child has demonstrated they can hold it. Not given as encouragement, not given as a reward for good behaviour, given specifically because the child has proven, through completed responsibility, that the weight of autonomy will not crush them. This means a Maasai child who manages the small herd successfully is not told, "Well done, now we'll give you more responsibility." They are simply given the larger responsibility. The autonomy is transferred as a direct consequence of demonstrated competence, not as a gift. The child experiences this as trust, not as praise. The distinction is significant. What it produces neurologically is a secure sense of causation. The child learns, my actions determine the scope of my world. When I manage what I have been given, I receive more. The locus of control is internal. Research on locus of control in children, particularly the work of clinical psychologist Wendy Grolnick at Clark University, whose 2003 review of 40 years of autonomy support literature remains among the most cited in developmental psychology, consistently shows that an internal locus of control is the single strongest predictor of resilience across age groups. More predictive than attachment style, more predictive than socio-economic status, more predictive than IQ. The modern failure mode here is not refusing to give children autonomy. It is giving autonomy without earned progression. Screen time as a reward for behavior compliance, extended freedoms offered as incentives, autonomy used as currency in a negotiation. What the child learns from this structure is not that their competence earns their world. It is that their compliance earns their world. The locus of control remains external. The next challenge still feels like a threat, because the child has no evidence that they personally can handle it. Maasai walking out with those goats this morning was not brave by the standards of his community. He was simply doing the next thing in a sequence that his competence had already earned. He had handled smaller versions of this 30 times. He had been seen handling them. He had been given exactly as much autonomy as he had proven he could carry. His nervous system arrived at that morning with a completely different architecture than a child who has been protected, praised, and kept comfortable. That architecture is not genetic. It was built, deliberately if informally, by 3 conditions applied together over 7 years. Remove any one of them, and the system does not produce the same child. For parents with children at different stages, here is what this looks like translated into the practical. For children aged 3 to 5, begin with graduated physical risk that has a real consequence the parent does not immediately repair. A dropped cup that the child cleans up. A difficult climb that the parent watches without reaching. A conflict with another child that is not mediated by an adult in the first 2 minutes. Keep the risk real. Keep the stakes genuinely the child's to manage. For children aged 5 to 8, introduce unsupervised peer interaction wherever possible. Not structured playdates with parental oversight, but genuine, unmanaged time with other children where social conflict and resolution happen without adult intervention. The community witness function requires real peers and real stakes. For children aged 8 to 12, transfer autonomy in direct proportion to demonstrated competence, not as a reward, not as an incentive, as the natural consequence of evidence. The child who has shown they can manage their time earns more time. The child who has shown they can be trusted in one environment earns access to more environments. Say explicitly, You proved you could handle that, so now you get this. The causation must be named. A reasonable first-year expectation. Children will not become fearless in a month. The prefrontal cortex development that underlies regulated fear response is measured in months and years, not weeks. What you will see in the first 30 days is something more modest and more real. A child who recovers from frustration slightly faster. A child who tries a second time without being prompted. A child who stops looking to you for permission before they've even tried. That is the first signal. It is worth noticing. This is not a complete overhaul of how you parent. It is 3 conditions, applied consistently, in the order that Lemosolai's community has always applied them without calling it anything. Start with letting the next small thing be genuinely theirs to handle. Watch what happens. Then tell me in the comments what you noticed, how old your child is, and what you let them manage on their own. I read these. If this kind of content is what you're looking for, specific cultures, specific developmental science, the real mechanisms behind why traditional communities produce children that modern environments don't, subscribe. There is more of this coming.